Welcome back to Occult Archives, everybody. We love to take these deep dives into history's most fascinating and sometimes kind of spooky books.
Yeah, from those ancient grimoires that people whispered about, the ones that were supposed to hold powerful magic too, like these cryptic religious texts, these books always seem to carry these secrets that are almost too dangerous to read.
Almost too dangerous, but not quite. I mean, that's why we're here, right? To explore them together. And today we're going deep, deep into a book that's both famous and infamous in the world of the occult.
That's right. We're talking episode 190, Veil of Symbols, The Pictorial Key to the Tarot by Arthur Edward Waite. So, for all you out there who are interested in getting right to the heart of knowledge, we're going to break down this really influential text. We know you don't want to get lost in, all the academic jargon and stuff,
Right.
right?
We want the good stuff, the real insights without all the fluff. And when it comes to the tarot, Arthur Edward Waite, he's kind of a big deal. I mean, he wasn't just some casual card reader.
Oh, absolutely not. He saw himself as a serious scholar of mystical traditions, an exponent of the higher mystic schools, to use his own words.
Which makes his fascination with the tarot, well, even more intriguing.
Yeah, it's almost like a contradiction, right? You have this guy steeped in these high-minded mystical traditions, and he's deeply interested in something as seemingly, commonplace as a deck of cards.
So what was it about the tarot that drew him in so strongly?
He actually addresses this in his book. He compares himself to Frater Christian Rosy Cross, the legendary figure from Rosicrucian lore. The story goes that after Rosy Cross witnessed this profound mystical event called the chemical marriage, he chose to take on the role of a simple doorkeeper.
Huh. So it's like even those who've reached these incredible heights of spiritual understanding, they can still find meaning in seemingly ordinary things.
Exactly. And Waite's justification for studying the tarot, it's really insightful. He believed that the tarot contained this very high symbolism, but he was adamant that these symbols should be interpreted through the laws of grace, not just through, the usual fortune-telling methods.
The laws of grace, huh? So he's suggesting that there's a deeper, more spiritual dimension to these cards than just predicting the future.
Exactly. And it's through these laws of grace, meaning through spiritual insight and intuition, that he believed we could truly understand the tarot.
So we're not just trying to read fortunes here, but we're trying to decode this secret language that we believed was embedded within the tarot.
Right on. And he structures his book in a way that guides us through this process of understanding. So he starts by looking at what he calls the antiquities of the subject. Basically, he's examining the history of the tarot as he understood it.
And then he delves into the symbolism according to higher aspects, right?
Yeah, and this is where he introduces his own version of the tarot, the rectified tarot designs, which became super influential. And finally, he tackles the outer method of the oracles, which is the part that deals with the divinatory meanings, the fortune-telling stuff.
Okay, so our mission today is to follow Waite's lead. We want to understand how he viewed the tarot, its history, its symbolism, and how he approached using it for divination. And of course, we're going to try to pull out those really fascinating insights for you, our listeners.
Right. So let's start at the beginning with Waite's perspective on the tarot's origins.
He definitely doesn't buy into some of those more romantic theories about where the tarot came from.
Nope, not at all. He pretty much dismisses the whole idea that the tarot originated in ancient Egypt or India or China. He even calls those claims deception and self-deception.
He was quite skeptical of those earlier theories, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He flat out states that there's no history prior to the 14th century.
Yeah, he was very adamant about that. And then he throws out his own rather intriguing but speculative alternative.
Which is,
Well, he suggests that maybe, just maybe, the tarot originated as a secret symbolic language used by the Albigensians.
the Albigensians. They were that religious group in southern France that got into a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church.
Exactly. They were considered heretics. And Waite points out some pretty fascinating parallels between certain tarot cards and the Albigensian story. He suggests that the Hierophant could represent a secret Albigensian patriarch, and the High Priestess could represent the Albigensian church itself.
And then there's that striking image of the tower struck by lightning. Waite suggests that this could symbolize the destruction of papal Rome. It's almost like a historical what-if scenario.
Right. It's fascinating to think about, and even Waite admits that he was almost persuaded by these possibilities. He calls them numerous and persuasive. But he also acknowledges that they're speculative.
So he's not presenting this as a definitive history, but it definitely adds another layer to the mystery.
Absolutely. So moving on, Waite then turns his attention to Antoine Court de Gébelin, who was really the first writer to bring the tarot to a wider audience.
Ah, yes, de Gébelin. He's credited with kickstarting the whole tarot craze, isn't he?
Yeah, pretty much. De Gébelin was convinced that the tarot was actually a remnant of an ancient Egyptian book. And he also observed that the tarot was being used across Europe for both games and divination.
And wait, he gives de Gébelin credit for bringing these facts to light, right?
He does. He acknowledges that de Gébelin played a key role in popularizing the tarot, but he strongly disagrees with de Gébelin's theory about its Egyptian origins. He sticks to his guns on that point.
It seems like Waite was really committed to debunking those romanticized notions about the tarot's ancient past.
Absolutely. And you know, de Gébelin's ideas, they really took off, especially in Paris. They sparked this whole trend of cartomancy, fortune-telling with cards.
And that's where figures like Ete came in.
Right. Exactly. Ateya, whose real name was Jean-Baptiste Aliette, he claimed to have studied Egyptian magic for, like, decades. And he presented the tarot as this super ancient and mystical text, the Book of Thoth, supposedly written by 17 magi near Memphis in Egypt.
It's quite a claim.
Yeah, and Waite wasn't buying it. He criticized Ataya for basically just parroting de Gébelin's ideas without really understanding of the deeper meaning of the tarot.
So Waite dismissed both de Gébelin's and Etea's theories. Did he have anything to say about Eliphas Levi's take on the tarot? Levi was another big name in 19th century occultism.
Oh, absolutely. Levi took the tarot even further than de Gébelin. He actually believed that the tarot was the source of all sacred writings, like the ultimate primordial book. Initially, Levi also accepted de Gébelin's Egyptian framework, but later on, the idea emerged that the tarot was transmitted to Europe by the gypsies. This was proposed by a scholar named J. A. Viant, who was an expert on the Romany people.
What did Waite think about that theory?
He wasn't entirely convinced. He pointed out that playing cards in some form were already present in Europe before the gypsies arrived, which, according to most scholars, was in the early 15th century.
So he's suggesting that the gypsies might have adopted the tarot from European culture rather than the other way around.
Right. So in part one of his book, Waite really does a thorough job of dismantling those earlier theories about the tarot's origins. He's not just presenting his own ideas, he's actively engaging with the scholarship that existed at the time. And by the end of this section, he's kind of cleared the way for his own, more symbolic interpretation of the tarot.
Right. He's essentially saying, okay, let's put aside those romanticized notions and look at what the tarot truly represents.
Exactly. And that brings us to part two, the doctrine behind the veil, which is where things get really interesting. This is where Waite lays out his core understanding of the tarot.
And this is where his deep mystical leanings really come to the forefront. Right.
Absolutely. He argues that the tarot isn't just a random collection of images. He believes that it embodies these symbolical presentations of universal ideas, what he calls secret doctrine.
Secret doctrine.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty mysterious.
It is. But Waite's not suggesting that this is some kind of hidden knowledge that's only accessible to a select few. He's actually saying that these truths have been realized by mystics and spiritual seekers throughout history, people who've been involved in traditions like alchemy, Kabbalism, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and so on.
So he's suggesting that these mystical traditions, they've tapped into something fundamental about the human experience, something that's actually embedded in the consciousness of all of us.
Precisely. And he sees the tarot as a way to access and understand these universal truths. So it's not just about predicting the future, it's about unlocking a deeper level of spiritual understanding.
And Waite was really passionate about illuminating these deeper meanings, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. He says that his aim is to explain the symbols of the Major Arcana, the trump cards, with a higher intention. He wants to go beyond the superficial level and delve into their spiritual significance. And to help us visualize these meanings, he introduces his own set of tarot designs, the rectified tarot, which were created in collaboration with the artist Pamela Colman Smith.
Yeah, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, as it's known today, those images are iconic.
They really are. They were included in Waite's book in black and white and also published separately as a full-color deck. And those designs became super influential in the development of modern tarot.
So let's take a look at some of these key Major Arcana cards and how Waite interpreted their symbolism. Let's start with the Magician, card number 1.
So the Magician For Waite, he's not some kind of stage magician pulling rabbits out of hats. He represents the divine motive in man, that spark of divine creativity that resides within each of us.
And what about all the symbols surrounding him?
Yeah, so above his head, you see that symbol of the Holy Spirit, which Waite interprets as the eternity of attainment in the spirit. And he's wearing this serpent belt, which also represents eternity. So there's this sense of timelessness and infinite potential associated with the magician.
And he's got one hand pointing upwards and the other pointing downwards.
Right. The upward pointing hand symbolizes his connection to the divine, the source of grace, and the downward pointing hand symbolizes his connection to the material world. And in front of him, you see a table with the 4 symbols of the tarot suits laid out.
Ah, so those represent the 4 elements.
Right.
Wands for fire, cups for water, swords for air, and pentacles for earth.
Exactly. And Waite sees those elements as tools that the magician can use to manifest his will in the world. He's like an alchemist, using the elements to transform and create.
And beneath the table you see those roses and lilies.
Those symbolize the cultivation of aspiration, that striving towards higher spiritual goals. Waite even connects the magician to esoteric traditions like Christian Gnosticism and Martinism. He sees the number 8, which is associated with the magician, as representing Christ in Martinism.
So for Waite, the magician is really about our innate ability to create and manifest, but guided by a higher spiritual purpose.
Right on. It's about aligning our will with the divine will.
Okay, let's move on to the High Priestess, card number 2.
Yeah.
She's always struck me as a very mysterious figure.
Yeah, she's definitely enigmatic. Waite describes her as the secret church, the house which is of God and man, and she's surrounded by all these symbols of feminine power and wisdom.
Like the lunar crescent at her feet.
Right, and the horn diadem with the globe on top and the solar cross on her chest, all these symbols point to her connection to both the moon and the sun, the feminine and the masculine principles.
And she's holding this scroll that says Torah, but it's partially covered.
That represents both the revealed and the hidden aspects of divine law. And she's seated between 2 pillars, a black one and a white one.
Those are the pillars of the mystic temple, right? The J and B pillars that you often see in Masonic and Kabbalistic imagery.
Exactly. And then there's that veil behind her, embroidered with palms and pomegranates.
The veil represents the hidden mysteries, the things that are not yet revealed.
Right. Waite calls the high priestess the queen of the borrowed light, meaning that she reflects the light of all knowledge and intuition. He even gives her the truest symbolic name, Shekinah, which is a Hebrew term for the dwelling presence of God.
So she's like this embodiment of divine wisdom and intuition, but it's a wisdom that's partially hidden, veiled.
Exactly. It's a wisdom that we have to seek out and uncover.
Okay, let's talk about death, card number 13. This is one of the most feared cards in the tarot, but Waite has a really interesting interpretation of it.
Yeah, he definitely challenges the conventional view of death as something purely negative. In his rectified tarot, death is depicted as a skeletal figure riding a white horse, holding a black banner with a white rose on it.
The white rose symbolizes life, right? That's a bit of a paradox.
Right. And the sun is rising in the distance between 2 pillars, which suggests a new beginning, a new dawn. And you see these figures of different social ranks, a king, a child, a maiden, a prelate, all falling before death.
So he's saying that death is an equalizer, that it comes for everyone, regardless of their status or position.
Exactly. And Waite emphasizes that this card isn't about literal death, but about a mystical death, a transformation of consciousness. He calls it an ascent in the spirit.
So it's about letting go of old patterns and beliefs that no longer serve us, making way for something new to emerge.
Exactly. It's about embracing change and transformation, even if it feels scary or painful.
Okay, let's move on to the Tower Struck by Lightning, card number 16. This is another card that often evokes fear and anxiety.
Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic image. Waite notes that this card has been given different names throughout history, like Castle of Plutus, God's House, Tower of Babel, and all these names point to a sense of upheaval, of things being disrupted and overturned.
And Waite finds it interesting that this card hasn't traditionally been associated with the destruction of Solomon's temple.
He does. He sees the tower as representing the ruin of the house of falsehood and the rending of a house of doctrine.
So it's not about physical destruction, but about the shattering of false beliefs and outdated dogmas.
Right. And the 2 figures falling from the tower, they represent the literal word made void, and it's false interpretation. It's like he's saying that sometimes we have to let go of our rigid interpretations of things, even spiritual teachings, in order to truly understand their essence.
So the Tower is a card of upheaval, but it's also a card of liberation. It's about breaking free from those structures that are holding us back.
Precisely. It's about clearing the way for something new and more authentic to emerge.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the world. Card number 21, the last card of the Major Arcana.
This card depicts a dancing figure within a wreath, surrounded by the 4 living creatures from the Book of Revelation.
And the wreath represents the world, right? The totality of existence.
Exactly. And the dancing figure represents the soul, moving freely and joyfully within the world. Waite sees this card as an image of the swirl of sensitive life, the ecstasy of being fully present in the physical world.
And the 4 living creatures, they represent the 4 elements again, right?
Right. But they also represent the 4 evangelists, the 4 corners of the world, the 4 winds. They're like guardians of the world, watching over the soul's journey. And Waite notes that Eliphas Levi interpreted the wreath as a crown and the figure as truth.
But Waite has a slightly different take on it, doesn't he?
He does. He sees the world as representing the restored world, the world at its highest level of natural perfection. He connects it to the biblical account of creation, when God declared everything to be good. And he dismisses the idea that this card represents the magus at the highest initiation or the absolute. He calls those interpretations ridiculous.
So, for Waite, the world represents a state of completion, of harmony between the soul and the world, a kind of earthly paradise.
Exactly. It's about finding our place in the grand scheme of things and embracing the beauty and wonder of creation.
So that wraps up part 2, where Waite lays out his profound understanding of the Major Arcana. And now we move on to part 3, the outer method of the oracles, which is where he finally addresses the divinatory aspect of the tarot.
Right. And here's where he makes a distinction between the greater arcana, the trump cards, and the lesser arcana, which are the numbered cards and court cards of the 4 suits.
And those 4 suits are wands, cups, swords, and pentacles. They correspond to the 4 suits in modern playing cards, but with slightly different meanings.
Exactly. Wands were originally called scepters, and they represent fire, energy, action, will. Cups represent water, emotions, relationships, intuition. Swords represent air, thoughts, communication, intellect. And pentacles represent earth, the material world, finances, health, work.
And each suit has 10 numbered cards, from ace to 10, and 4 court cards: king, queen, knight, and page. Though Waite mentions that some older decks have a maid of honor instead of a page.
Right. And one of the key innovations of Waite's rectified tarot was that he and Pamela Colman Smith created images for all the cards in the minor arcana, not just the major arcana. This made the cards much easier to read intuitively because the images actually depicted the meanings of the cards.
Yeah, that was a big deal. It really changed the way people approach the tarot.
It did. And Waite provides a range of divinatory meanings for each card in the minor arcana. But what's interesting is that these meanings are sometimes quite contradictory or ambiguous. That makes you wonder how much importance Waite actually placed on the divinatory aspect of the tarot.
Yeah, it seems like he was more interested in the deeper symbolism of the cards than in using them to predict the future.
That's definitely a possibility. But he still provides detailed interpretations for each card, so he obviously saw some value in the divinatory process.
Okay, so let's look at some examples of Waite's interpretations for the minor arcana. Let's start with the kings. What does he say about the King of Wands?
He describes the King of Wands as a dark, passionate, and honorable man. He's someone who's friendly, married, honest, and conscientious. But if the card is reversed, he can be good, but severe.
And the Queen of Wands.
She's a similar personality, but more magnetic. She's described as a dark, friendly, chaste, and honorable woman. But if the card is reversed, she can represent opposition or jealousy.
And the Knight of Wands.
He's shown on a journey, so he represents departure, absence, immigration. But if the card is reversed, it can indicate rupture or discord.
And the Ten of Wands.
That one's a bit paradoxical. It shows a figure burdened by staves, so it can represent oppression, but it can also mean fortune or success. And if the card is reversed, it suggests contrarieties and intrigues.
Okay, let's move on to the cups. What about the King of Cups?
He's a fair man, maybe involved in business, law, or divinity. He's described as obliging and equitable. But if the card is reversed, he becomes dishonest.
And the Queen of Cups.
She's a fair, honest, loving woman with vision. She promises success and happiness. But if the card is reversed, she can be untrustworthy.
And the Five of Cups.
That one signifies loss and inheritance, but if the card is reversed, it suggests news and alliances.
Okay, swords. What about the King of Swords?
He embodies judgment, power, and authority. But if the card is reversed, he can be cruel and perfidious.
And the Knight of Swords.
He's skilled and brave, representing war and destruction. But if the card is reversed, he represents imprudence.
And the Ten of Swords.
That one's pretty bleak. It shows a figure pierced by swords, so it obviously represents pain and desolation.
Yeah.
But if the card is reversed, it can actually mean advantage or temporary success.
Wow, that's a big shift in meaning. Okay, lastly, Pentacles. What about the King of Pentacles?
He's seen as valiant and skilled in business. But if the card is reversed, he embodies vice and weakness.
And the Queen of Pentacles.
She represents opulence and generosity, but if the card is reversed, she becomes suspicious and fearful.
And the Five of Pentacles.
That one shows two mendicants in the snow, so it foretells material trouble. But if the card is reversed, it indicates overcoming financial hardship through reason.
Okay, so those are just a few examples of Waite's interpretations for the Minor Arcana. And as you can see, the meanings can be quite nuanced and even contradictory at times.
Right. And what's even more interesting is that Waite includes a section in his book called Some Additional Meanings of the Lesser Arcana. And in this section, he provides even more meanings for the cards, and these meanings often have very little connection to the images on the cards.
So it's like he's acknowledging that the divinatory meanings are somewhat arbitrary, that they're not necessarily fixed or absolute.
Exactly. And that brings us to Waite's discussion of different methods of reading the tarot. He outlines several different approaches, some of which are quite complex.
He starts with a section on the recurrence of cards in dealing.
Right. In this section, he explains how the number of cards of the same rank that appear in a reading can have a special significance. Like if you get 4 kings, that signifies great honor, while 3 kings suggest consultation.
And then he introduces an ancient Celtic method of divination.
This method involves using a significator card to represent the person asking the question or the topic being explored, and then you lay out 10 cards in a specific pattern, and each position in the pattern has a particular meaning. So it's a very structured approach to reading the cards.
And then he presents an alternative method of reading the tarot cards, which involves a much more complex layout of 42 cards.
Right. This method is intended for general inquiries about life and destiny, and it's quite intricate, with the cards being dealt into 6 packets and read from right to left.
And he even provides a method for using 35 cards.
Yeah, the method of reading by means of 35 cards. This one is supposed to be a follow-up to the 42 card method, providing further clarification on specific issues. It's a very detailed system, with the cards being arranged in 6 unequal packets, each representing a different aspect of life.
So Waite really does a deep dive into the divinatory aspect of the tarot, even though it seems like his primary interest was in the card's deeper symbolism.
Absolutely. And in his concluding thoughts on secret doctrine, he circles back to the Major Arcana. He reiterates his belief that these cards contain a secret doctrine, but he clarifies that he's not talking about some kind of hidden knowledge that's only accessible to initiates of secret societies.
But what is he talking about then?
He's suggesting that there's a deeper layer of meaning within the Major Arcana that's accessible to anyone with a mystical inclination. He encourages the reader to contemplate a specific set of cards. The Magician, the Fool, the High Priestess, the Hierophant, the Empress, the Emperor, the Hanged Man, the Tower, and the Last Judgment. He believes that these cards, when considered together and separately, reveal the legend of the soul.
So he's suggesting that the Major Arcana can be read as a kind of spiritual roadmap, a guide to the soul's journey.
Precisely. And he sees this as a path to understanding the profound truths that lie hidden beneath the surface of the tarot's imagery.
It's a fascinating perspective, and I think it speaks to Waite's overarching goal, which was to elevate the tarot beyond its reputation as a mere fortune-telling tool and to reveal its true potential as a source of spiritual wisdom and insight.
I agree. And I think that's why Waite's work continues to resonate with so many people today. He invites us to engage with the tarot not just as a way to predict the future, but as a way to explore the depths of our own souls and to connect with something greater than ourselves.
So for our listeners out there who are interested in gaining knowledge quickly but thoroughly, what are some of the key takeaways from our deep dive into Arthur Edward Waite's The Pictorial Key to the Tarot?
Well, first of all, Waite challenges many of the traditional assumptions about the tarot's origins. He debunks the romanticized notions of an ancient Egyptian or Eastern origin and grounds the tarot more firmly in the late medieval period.
Right. And he also emphasizes the tarot's rich and multi-layered symbolism, particularly in the Major Arcana. He sees these cards as embodying profound, spiritual, and philosophical truths that go far beyond simple fortune-telling.
Exactly. And despite his focus on the tarot's deeper meaning, he also provides practical guidance on using the cards for divination. He outlines several different methods of reading the tarot, suggesting that even this more practical application can be a way to access those deeper layers of meaning.
So for our listeners, I would pose this question. Considering Waite's emphasis on the tarot's inner symbolism and its potential for revealing the legend of the soul, what aspects of these ancient images resonate most deeply with your own quest for understanding life's mysteries?
And now that you've glimpsed Waite's veil of symbols, how might this perspective change the way you view not just the tarot, but other systems of esoteric knowledge that blend history, symbolism, and practical application?
We encourage you to delve further into Waite's work or to explore the symbolism of the tarot in more depth. There's a wealth of knowledge and insight to be gained from these ancient cards if you're willing to look beyond the surface.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into occult archives.
Until next time, keep exploring the hidden knowledge of the world's most feared books.